So hello, everyone, and welcome to Making Chaotic Great, Finding Precedent in Unprecedented Times, Making Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. I'm Kayla Belmore, the senior producer on the project, and this is Matt Cox, creative director.
Hey folks, thanks again for coming. This is awesome that you guys are all here, but a little bit more about us before we get started. Again, my name is Matt Cox. I was born in Washington, D.C., but I grew up most of my life right outside of Kansas City in Kansas, and I am a shameless Nintendo nerd for as long as I can remember. And about high school times, I wanted to have a really robust music career and go on the road, but I figured that was going to be pretty risky, so I decided to get a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from the University of Kansas. And at college, I met my soon-to-be wife then, and I decided to stick around, and I became a newspaper sales manager for about 5 years, which was probably one of the most boring jobs I've ever had. And then something happened. Halo PC happened. Gearbox released Halo PC, and then the Halo editing kit, and that was the first time I was able to spawn Master Chief on a piece of geometry that I created from a totally legit copy of 3ds Max. But it was that moment that I realized that, oh my gosh, I really want to do this for a living. And so I started creating a bunch of level designs, but I had a moment where I was like, well, do I want to choose the art path or the design path? So I went out and bought a book on how-to for illustration, and the first task at the end of the first chapter was like, draw someone from memory. And of course, who did I choose but my lovely wife, Emily, and this was my illustration. Thank you. And it was from this moment I realized, design it is. So my first game job was with THQ on the Destroy All Humans franchise, and then I was the lead designer on the very first Scribblenauts game, and then I left video games entirely for about 6 years. But even during that hiatus, I made 4 little micro games for Android and iOS as well as Steam, and then I came back to AAA on Borderlands, did a bunch of design stuff for Borderlands 3, then directed the campaign expansion, Bounty of Blood, and then I landed as creative director on Wonderlands.
And if you have any questions about the design track versus the production track and the mindset, just look at our slide differences. So my job in the industry, my very first one, was as a personal assistant back in 2010 at Irrational Games, and I worked my way up through the ranks and learned everything I could about production and became a senior producer at Gearbox eventually. I had some weird pandemic hobbies. Everyone did. This is some great icebreaker material. I started befriending my neighborhood crows. Now they land on my chimney and scream at me if I don't give them peanuts. I also collect antique cookbooks, so if you need an aspect recipe, I got you. I asked some friends to describe me, and here's some quotes. I am always one drink or hangry away from coming back to my Boston accent, wicked piss a kid, and I am the living embodiment of all trash birds. And that's a seagull, Matt.
Okay, seagulls, got it, yeah. Trash birds.
And I have been dubbed the official project mom. Whenever we go somewhere, whenever we travel, I just hear, Mom, can we get a meal? And that's how it happens. And I love putting this in here, this little quiz at the end. If you can read those acronyms, if you know, you know. It's either a localist or a DSM-V5 diagnostic. I made 2 sets of people in the room uncomfortable with that one. Fantastic. The reason why I put this in here, and it's going to become more important later and apparent in this talk, is that, yeah, it's hard. It's hard up here sometimes. And you can still be a leader, and you can still do it, but it's going to take a lot of work and proactive effort to make that happen. You'll learn a little bit more about that later and how we decided to manage Wonderlands in unprecedented times. Quick look at my ship titles. Started with BioShock Infinite, worked on the DLC, started at the season pass of Battleborn, so I worked a little bit of production on the art pipeline on that post-launch content, did work on Borderlands 3 as a pipeline producer as well as an AP, and then became a senior producer on Wonderlands.
So developing precedent in unprecedented times. So first we want to call out the 3 time periods that kind of happened to all of us over the last several years. There is the before times, pre-lockdown. We had precedent on how pipelines worked, how relationships worked, how we reacted to the new challenges of just normal development. Your studio had those precedents, and so did we. But then the lockdown happened. These were obviously unprecedented times. It was a novel environment, and we had to make more proactive choices for empathy, understanding, and advocating for the health of our teams. And during lockdown, our nature was amplified, especially with how we react to harsh circumstances or strong disagreements. So when people have that fight or flight or freeze response, we had to develop the habit of assuming the best in all of us. And then present times, when we came through the lockdown, we had better tools and a better lens for proactive problem solving, and we were better prepared for change. We learned, one of the biggest things that we learned is you don't naturally have to do combat. Not every disagreement has to be combat. And when it comes to Kayla and I, we're very fortunate because before we started working together, we kind of already agree on a lot about the intersection of scope and quality, but we know there are stereotypes of the roles of creative director versus project producer.
And stereotypes look about like those fighting cats over there. And that's because these roles in some ways are diametrically opposed. And my job is to make sure that it ships. And sometimes those things are just in disagreement. It can lead to this idea in the industry where producers are the sanity and creative directions the vanity, or if you're on the other side of the coin, the kill versus the joy. We're in there with the scissors cutting things, saying you got to ship it on time, you're spending too much money, and the creative directors are like, hey, we want to make it the most fun game ever. And both people are right. Both jobs are just doing their jobs, and the right amount of that friction can actually make a really good game because it comes out, there are constraints, but it's also still fun. And it's really important to make sure that when you're thinking about production, you're also quality-minded because the quality of your game cuts into profits, and it makes it so you can probably get more money to make great games later. As a creative director, it's really important to make sure that you're thinking a little bit about production and the pipelines and the constraints that your projects are under to have realistic expectations and decisions and avoid things like crunch when you can. So instead of going into a divided mentality, that us versus them culture, we decided that it was the most important thing to work together. As Matt said, we already kind of were on that same track of like, I like a good quality game, I like a fun game, and he likes to ship games. So may as well work together and make it work. And that became so important to make a conscious decision to wake up and go to the office virtually every day during the pandemic and understand that we were making that decision together even when things were hard and even when it was just awful. And feeling awful means that it's a lot harder to come to the table with compromise. And that is something that we funneled down to the team. When they saw us working together, they were more likely to work empathically across departments and understand each other's constraints. And at the end of the day, we avoided a lot of toxicity that could have happened, and we've seen happen on other projects and at other studios. And that was super important to us, and we made a great game as sane as we possibly could. So, how did we prevent all of this toxicity during unprecedented times, and how did we work together?
So we developed a proactive precedent, and these are sort of, not all, but three of the main pillars or the lens that we try to direct with through our entire process. Scope-minded creative direction, quality-minded production, and whole health advocacy. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time today sort of unpacking these three pillars. And we're hoping that the learnings that we have can better help in all lanes of development, no matter what the title or what the department. So what is scope-minded creative direction? Well, first of all, we want to have our developers create achievable design goals from the very beginning. See, we know that there is going to be amount of scope creep. Like, the goal is not to like have no scope creep. There's always going to be an element of scope creep. So the more that you can prepare and buffer that from the beginning to the best of your ability, the better the development is going to be. And also, we want to have our developers, not just production lanes, take timelines seriously. Report issues early and often. Be transparent with your leads and your teams at all times, so that it's, because you never want those above to be caught flat-footed. We want all teams to be very aware of the challenges every moment of every milestone, because we don't want anybody else to get caught flat-footed with scope mishaps. So yes, make the effort to understand the full array of time and resource limitations. We don't want designers or any other developer to create and work in a complete vacuum, not understanding how every choice affects downstream departments. It is okay for artists and designers and programmers to understand the totality of how production lanes work. Understand where they bottleneck. Teaching teams to understand scope, not just creating that vacuum, and it's okay, and I dare say necessary, to educate our teams in how all of that works. Every choice affects more than just you in your seat, and that is an okay thing to teach in the design department. So once you have those constraints and you understand all of the limitations, let the constraints spark the creativity, instead of letting unchecked blue sky mode persist beyond the concept phase, where that's obviously a lot more buffer time to allow. Scope-minded creative direction as well. The core concept, I understand, is sort of unpopular. The concern is, well, I want to be able to create everywhere at all times with immunity. But for me, I like to ship games. And eventually, you do have to buckle down and fully embrace the limitations of time and scope. And so we want to choose our innovations carefully. It doesn't mean you don't innovate. It doesn't mean you don't add a +1 to your IP or whatever new thing you're bringing to the table, because it is the job of the designer to bring something new to the table, or bring something new to the IP, of course. But not everything needs to be original. And I'm glad this is the production summit and not the design summit, because I'd get so many more boos in the design summit. But I know it sounds controversial, right? But effective content is better than original content for the sake of being original. Sometimes it is better to be effective than original. Originality should never come at the expense of being effective. Sometimes it's better to be effective than original and not reinvent every wheel. Instead, knowing your constraints, be calculated with what parts you choose to innovate, and prove the fun first. Spend the innovation effort on the things that you have proven early. Find the fun early and find it cheaply. If you need a ton of animation polish and pretty art to make it fun, guess what? It wasn't fun. But understand your constraints. I believe that amazing creativity can come from within constraints. So prototype a lot, cheaply, early. Bring something new to the table, definitely, even if it's just new to the IP itself, right? And embrace performance limitations, embrace memory limitations, learn to be creative within constraints. And this is what I kind of like to say, these are the Legos. You have a bunch of Legos that are gathered from a bunch of different sets and the plans, you've lost the plans and a bunch of pieces from all of the other Legos, but you have the bucket of Legos that you now understand, dump it on the table. These are the Legos, build something.
So what is quality-minded production? This is not something that we hear every day, because there's that diametrically opposed bit to production in itself, where we're numbers, we're schedules, we're keeping things on track, we're removing roadblocks, but quality isn't necessarily our motivation, certainly for some producers, it's not making creative changes or having creative opinions a lot of the time. But keeping quality in mind is really important, even if it's not your jam, because it helps you understand the motivations of your team. And if you understand the motivations of your team, you'll understand how to work better with them and work with them. That is the most important part. If production isn't working with the development team, they will work around you. I'm sure some of you in this room have experienced that. I see a lot of heads nodding. So this is a little bit on how to work with the team, keeping quality in mind, because that's their motivation. It should be part of yours too. And I'm going to say it, and this is another controversial line, iteration is important and inevitable. There will be feature creep. There will be unknowns. There will be things that just don't work out the first time you try them. And that's okay. Help your team make a plan to get to where they need to be. If you try to fight it, if you try to force it not to happen, chances are the people that are the powers that be are going to want the better game and the more profitable game anyway, and they're going to force the change, and it's going to be more costly and more expensive and more detrimental to the physical and mental health of your team. So understand going into this that your plan, your beautiful, brilliant production plan that is in 3 places, and it's in Jira, and it's a Gantt chart, and it is wonderful, is not going to survive contact with the team. Something is going to go wonky, and that might be a bad plan. It might be absolutely outside of your control because suddenly a department becomes shorthanded or you couldn't get the recruiting that you need. There are a million reasons that the plan just goes bad, and that's okay. Make a new plan and work with your team to help them realize their goals within the constraints that you need to set, because sometimes there are hard constraints, but you need to make those understood, so not everything's a fight. And that also means advocating for the team when those limitations, those hard constraints, those very, very real deadlines, resource issues, a pandemic, all of those things sometimes make the current schedule, the current plan just not livable for the team. As production, it is our job to report those issues and become the advocates when our teams do not have the things that they need to do to make a good project. We are the advocates, we are a conduit, and we are the removers of roadblocks. So that means that we have to speak up and say something, even if it's just about making quality better, because good quality on time, that's the magic right there. And it has to be said, and this is really good for any leader. You have to say the words. You have to say that the limitations are there. You can't just assume that if a department only has 2 people left in it, everybody knows that you're going to have to rely less on that department. It has to be said because everyone is hyper-focused on their own lanes, and leaders and producers in particular have a unique view of the project where we get the bird's eye. We get the 1,000-foot view. We are the ones that have to set those expectations for the team. And another unpopular thing with producers, because most of us have a very similar high-strung mindset, you can't control it all. Stop trying. No, really, you will drive yourself like a little bit nuts. I have done it. I'm still not recovered from it. You cannot control it all. And I say this as someone who ridiculously went into Tiny Tina's Wonderlands as the only senior producer on the project. So how did I approach it as a leader on Tiny Tina's Wonderlands to help the game move forward within constraints, but at a good quality? The most important thing that I came to every meeting thinking, and I tried to impress upon the rest of the production team working on the project, is that we do negotiation before negation.
Love that.
Do not say no to things on principle. It's just not good for the project. It's not good for your team. A lot of the times when a designer comes and requests something or when a change needs to happen, there's flexibility there. So it's your job to be flexible too. Help get to the goal and help them understand where the constraints are before just saying no. You can say, hey, that whole thing might not be tenable, but if we cut something else that's less important or scale it down, we might be able to get halfway there. Those conversations are key to building trust. And it also takes transparent communication. As long as your motivation is good and you're being honest in a way that is not damaging, transparency is the way to go. You will regret it far fewer times than you will obscuring information. And nothing, again, is implicit. And I will say that a few times because there are so many times in my career where I've thought, that should have been obvious. But then I realized that my perspective on the project is a lot different than other people's, and I see a lot more. It's my job to give the whole picture. So if something's happening way down in effects land, art team needs to know about it. Concept needs to know about it so they can prepare. They know which teams to lean on and which teams to not lean on. And that also leads into expectation management. If you tell the team where our constraints are, where our challenges are, and where the freedom is, they are empowered to make better decisions to help the game move forward. Trust that in this industry, we're working with all really smart, pretty cool people. Most humans want to be good to other humans, but if they're lacking context and information, they're going to just move forward with blinders on and make the best decision for their department and throw things over the fence. If you foster empathy across teams, educate people on the pipeline and what it takes for a character to go from concept to in the game across the teams, even the production department, it's really important that you know your pipeline. It's going to make everything move a lot easier. People will be more willing to work with each other because you've created empathy. You have created understanding between departments, and you will get less siloed work. I also fundamentally believe that leadership is a service role. It's okay to be a leader. It's okay to make decisions. Half the time, that's the hard part of our job, is making those hard decisions. But you're not there to crack the whip and tell everyone just what to do. You're not going to make any designer just work faster. Artists love to hear that. Go ahead and try that with the art department. Don't, really don't. You are a service. You are the person on the curling team with a little broom helping that thing get across the way. You are the air traffic controller. You are the plumber. Leadership is messy, it's scary, and if you feel uncomfortable with it, you're probably doing it right. If you feel like everything's going great and you're just on high giving orders, something's probably going wrong that you don't know about. And that's important to build that trust. I'm going to talk about trust a lot. The negotiation requires trust. The team coming to you and feeling safe to bring up problems if scope is untenable, if there's something that needs to change in the schedule, if there's something that needs to change in the content, they need to trust you. And they need to trust that you will do something about it. And you have to. You have to follow through. And that sometimes means showing your work. Napkin math, great. Gut checks, amazing. You'll probably be right. All of you have probably been in this industry a hot minute. And those gut checks, almost always right. But if you have to report these issues up to anybody that's in the powers that be, or if you have to report these issues to a different team, you are going to have to show your work. You're going to come up with material truth because people believe data over feelings. Feelings are not fact, feelings are subjective. Data is not. So you need to show your work and be able to build your case to do that follow through for your team. And if you do follow through, you will build that trust and make that feedback loop a lot better.
So this is arguably, from my view, kind of the biggest takeaway that we learned over the course of the pandemic. And it's something we're calling whole health advocacy. So instead of waiting for a moment for an issue to arrive and just try to firefight and like get rid of something, instead build an actual habit of advocating for your team's whole health, from mental health to physical health. And we were trying to come up with some phrase that kind of captured like a lot of this. And we didn't want to say the term self-care, sorry. Different talk. We didn't want to say self-care due to the association with possible toxic positivity, because it doesn't always give a full picture, right? We don't mean anything by whole health advocacy, anything like fake happiness. This isn't about fake happiness. We mean whole health advocacy, mental to physical and beyond. But before you can advocate effectively or authentically for your team's whole health, you have to take a look inside and advocate for your own whole health and figure out what that means for you to move forward. So it's the old rule, put on your own oxygen mask first.
So some of you are probably thinking, but why is it important? I can just work until I die, and that's fine. It's not. Producers in the room, I got you. You need boundaries. Speaking as someone who had trouble with this, you need to set boundaries. A work-life balance is extremely important. There will be times that you might have to push, that it's unavoidable. But then the times that are your downtimes in between, don't feel guilt for not being busy every second of the day if it doesn't warrant it. Don't feel guilt for taking a day off if you need it. Your sanity meter is key to the project, especially the higher up you get in leadership. If you come to work in a nasty mood, that sets the tone for the team for the day. If you can't pick yourself up, it's better to just walk away before you accidentally start a fight or you become combative for no reason or you're just down. The team will see that. It's advice I got early on in my career, and it still maintains truth. The more I can present myself calmly and approach issues calmly and approach challenges in a logical way and still be able to deal with anybody else's feelings, the better it is. You need to have the spoons to support your team. So keep that sanity meter up by maintaining some work-life balance and step away if you have to. And that's because our ability to reason is all tied into adrenal response. The frontal lobe of our brain actually shuts down if we are overstressed. For creatives, that means you're not doing your best work, and for people who have to make logical decisions on behalf of large teams or whole departments, you need that. You need to be able to have that to make good decisions and make them with the best and most rational mind that you have at the time. So all of these things, advocating for your own mental health, are so important. It's actually science. It is in your brains. This is how we work. This is not some woo-woo stuff. This is not kumbaya, we all feel good, toxic positivity. This is just how we work. Things shut down if you are not taking care of yourself. And that means accepting conflict. I know, nobody likes conflict. It's uncomfortable, it hurts, it does not feel good. But if you accept conflict as opportunity to grow, as a challenge, as a potential to make the game better, to improve your workflows and your pipelines, if you can accept a little criticism or at least a little bit of a challenge, that's good. That's a good thing. Some amount of friction is a good thing to make a game. New decisions get made by that. Innovation gets made by conflict, but not by fights. So just remember, when you're approaching a conflict, it does not have to be a battle. It does not have to be combative. If you are setting good boundaries and have your sanity meter high, you'll be able to talk through it. And in times when you kind of mess up, the art of a good apology is a whole thing that you could do a GDC talk in, but I will leave you with this, because a good friend and colleague of mine, Lorianne Megersey, also a producer, gave me this one time, and I have never forgot to this day. If you mess up, have a regrettable incident, say something personal or that you really shouldn't have, a good apology must pass the corpse test. If a corpse can do it, it's a bad apology. If you say, I'm sorry, I'll never swear in a meeting again, that's a terrible apology. No one's going to believe you. One, it's not realistic. Two, a corpse can do it. If you say, hey, I will make a conscious effort to not use offensive language, and I understand that I hurt your feelings with that, that is a much better apology and an action that you can take. A conscious effort is not the same as, I'll never do it again. So keep these things in mind for why what we're talking about is so important. And we're going to give you some real-life examples of how we dealt with our own mental spoons and stayed sane through the project.
So yeah, the pandemic was the worst time of my depression. I struggled with depression off and on my entire life, and the pandemic was the magnifying glass from the sun. So I went back to therapy. And I've been very open about that, and I forget sometimes that generations before us have just a huge stigma, and even our generation, I'm old, but like the elder millennials in here, oh God. There's a stigma, and I forget that there's a stigma, but nothing busts stigma like leadership admitting that they have mental health issues and they are seeking help. You should do it. make a point, and there was one quarterly, we have like these quarterly updates our company does, like, hey, show and tell sort of thing at a very, very high level. And one quarterly I decided to say, hey, I'm in therapy to everybody across all Gearbox studios. And I didn't think anything of it because I was just like saying, hey, times are hard, please go get help. And I was surprised that I got so many messages like, I'm so glad you said that because not enough people talk about it, and it blows my mind. But hey, if you're like me thinking, oh yeah, everybody's cool with mental health now and everybody's seeking therapy, it's not true. You probably have so many people on your teams that have some sort of shame that is learned from previous generations passed down to us that it is shameful to go seek help for your mental health. It is not. So for me anyway, quit creative outlets. So being a creative director, you're not on the front lines anymore. You don't own specific lanes of content because you can't. But I love creating content. So I had to find different ways of doing that. So I got on TikTok. That might be weird to you, but there's a whole slew of elder millennials that found TikTok over the pandemic. So I found, and it was so awkward, guys. Like, it's like, what do I do? Is this a sound? And I'm doing dance trends. That didn't last at all. It's like, oh gosh. Then I did cat videos, and then I like eventually landed in this like 90s nostalgia niche, making these goofy like whatever nostalgia things. That was really fun for me. But it was something quick to do, and I finally got that hit of I created something. I'm not checking anything in Jira anymore, but at least I made a TikTok. But yeah, and I started creating music again. I'm a musician off and on, and so I like to create music, and so I got back into creating music. And again, that helped with the creation need. And my 12-year-old daughter found a love of baking over the pandemic, and so I taught her the basics of video editing, and then she just like helping her create her own like little baking channel was wonderful for me. And then settling routines became big. Like I had certain shows that I absolutely loved, like comfort food, and my gosh, comfort food, it was great during the pandemic, especially if it wasn't actually food. But I found my familiar shows to watch. And Animal Crossing, oh man, that came out at just the right time, didn't it? I think I poured like 1,000 hours into Animal Crossing for like that good 3 months that it was out, and then I just dropped it. I don't know, but it was such a great moment. But finding something that you can pour yourself into to get your mind to escape. And then I don't know about you, but I discovered weighted blankets over the pandemic, and oh my gosh, that helped my sleep a ton.
For me, I also am in therapy, and I was open about it to the team. Reinforcing the idea takes more than just one voice. And as Matt mentioned, leadership reinforcing that idea makes it feel okay for the team. It sets a good example. You taking care of yourself will make your teams want to take care of themselves. If you are someone that works your way up to leadership and you are fortunate to have the respect and admiration of anyone on your team, they're going to act like you, thinking that's how you got to where you are. And even if you crunched like crazy, even if you pushed yourself too hard, if you don't want them to get to where you are, if you believe that there is a better way, and there is, you need to walk the walk. You need to act like there is a better way. You are a leader, and you need to make it okay for them to do that. And one of the ways Matt and I decided to do that was to be open and say, hey, therapy is cool. And again, nothing's implicit. If you don't say that, some people might not understand or believe that. And also, it's important to work with your company. Gearbox Software is very good to us, and we are extremely fortunate that they are supportive of therapy, that they can provide resources for us through our health insurance and through other means. So work with your company and leadership, find out what resources are available. If you can get HR to like send out a mailer, that's cool. But if you can just find out personally on the team what those things are, definitely try to do that. It's really, really helpful for folks to be able to get that information because sometimes starting is the hardest way to go about it. I am also high-strung. I need to move. I've probably been fidgeting this whole time. I blink a lot. I know. I hate watching myself after these things. So I need to get outside. I need to be run around like a greyhound. And that was not as easy during the pandemic because a lot of the things that I like to do outside were social. So I did more long-distance running. Away from people, away from everything. I also discovered stand-up paddleboarding or supping if you're cool. I am not cool, but it's a great lower impact activity. You can be out on a lake away from people, and I found a lot of good friends that way after the pandemic. So if you're someone who likes nature and you can be outside and that's your happy place, definitely try out a few new things too if you're feeling a little bit stagnated or you break your foot. I also enjoy some like low-key stress reducing shows. I know that like some of the later seasons are a little problematic, but early seasons of the Great British Baking Show are my jam. I go back to those. I love my Mary Berry. She calms me down. It's just great chilling out stuff. I do not have a TikTok. I am not that cool, but I can tell you there is nothing weirder than working like very closely with somebody for a long time on a project and then doom scrolling at 2 in the morning and then hearing real things people talk about in the 90s and seeing your coworker's face. That is a moment. All the elder millennials found TikTok. Another thing that just sounds way less fun than anything that Matt's doing that I found that really personally helped me was delegation. It sounds boring and it sounds hard and it's icky, but it's super important. I took on way too much. I had a team of feature producers, of strike team producers, and departmental producers. They're all really, really good at their jobs. I just didn't like want to bother them. You guys get it. So it was really hard for me to delegate. And then I realized after reading some books on leadership and trying to level myself up that not doing that, feeling like I'm bothering my own team, actually was robbing them of the opportunity to take on new challenges and learn. I was doing a bad manager by not allowing my team to do some learning. So I had to let go of the idea that working with people was bothering them, that foisting new opportunities that I didn't like to do onto people was not rude, it was not mean, it was delegation. It was helping them help themselves. And generally speaking, if I gave someone the opportunity to learn something new, I would ask them, hey, do you have enough on your plate right now? Do you want to take on more? Have that conversation. Don't just like give everyone your responsibilities. But they were actually happy to have it. They're like, oh, I learned some things, and now I feel like I can level up. Now I feel like I can promote it, or I just know more things. So it's really important to make sure that you are delegating for your own sanity and for the sake of your team. If you won't do it for yourself, because a lot of people who can't delegate won't, do it for the fact that it will help your teams, and it will help them advance, it will help them grow, and that helps you in the long run too. I also have to keep myself organized. I'm going to say something truly controversial and awful, but I don't like putting my personal tasks in Jira, which is the worst because I make everybody else do their tasks in Jira. But it's because, especially at the senior producer level, I have about 1 million things to do, 5,000 spinning plates that all take less time, technically, in the day than actually creating and closing a Jira task. I am a recovering sticky notes addict and notebook addict, so I personally like Trello as a program because you've got that visceral ability to move something from one category to another, but it's less messy than having your monitor look like a lion from all of the sticky notes on it, or wondering which notebook you put that really, really important thing that you totally weren't going to forget in. And when you have the level of responsibility that you do as senior project producer or any production department or any leadership department, it's really important not to forget that little tiny thing that you put in that notebook somewhere. So I recommend having your stuff digital. I also recommend having it all in one place. The hardest thing that I had to learn was letting go. Some of that was through delegation. Some of that was through harder things. And this is why we say whole health advocacy is not the same as just self-care, or at least what self-care has been thought to mean to become. It is not manicures always. It is not a hot bubble bath. Although, like, if those things are your jam, go do it. Sometimes it's taking care of yourself in the hardest ways possible. During the creation of Wonderlands and during the pandemic, I realized I was in a marriage that had become toxic and wasn't working. So part of my self-care and letting go was ending that so I could be okay. And that sucked. That was absolutely awful. But it was the right thing for my mental health, and it made me a better leader to my team to not be distracted and hurting all the time. So when we say whole health advocacy, sometimes it means doing the worst feeling thing for the greater good for yourself and your team in the long run. And sometimes that's project decisions too. And then, of course, my pets. Because every time I talk about something heavy, I always add a picture of the cats. Just bring it on back. The tabby is Kirk, and the tuxedo is Omen. I know that's important information.
So, the precedent that we learned and found during the unprecedented times. Once we started trying to apply these lessons during development, what did we see? What were some of these observable results? Well, we saw developers take the time to learn about cross-discipline departments and not just their own specific lane. I saw people start to learn about downstream impacts of choices that they make. And this understanding helped change attitudes on pushback and on limitations. It created empathy across disciplines. And one of the things that can happen when you just stick to your own lane, toxicity, it becomes a breeding ground for toxicity, especially when you have leadership that is hostile. Hostile leadership creates developers that go around them. And that breeds the worst type of toxicity. So, empathy across disciplines, which comes from understanding what other disciplines go through in this crazy, messy thing called game development, is absolutely critical. The relative stress level was reduced. And I know that's a crazy, yeah, we were in the pandemic, we didn't have stress. That's not what this is saying. I'm saying in general, the stress that we create ourselves by not having empathy or understanding for our fellow developers was reduced. When things got tough, we were able to keep on keeping on through it. And landing the game wasn't the worst, again, relative to the stress that we create
Trademark.
Ourselves. Yes, still very hard, hardest thing to ship a game during the pandemic, but overall the types of stress and hard things we create ourselves by being in our own vacuum was reduced. We saw teams starting to raise red flags for people's mental health, and developers themselves started raising their hand, and they had to go and take care of themselves or take care of their family for sometimes an extended period of time, and nobody was shamed for that. People's response, and Gearbox in general, I feel very lucky to work at this company because Gearbox was already very good about a family-first focus. But oh my gosh, did the pandemic ever put a magnifying glass on how important that muscle is to build? Being a people, person-focused game studio first. Person over product. And so, yeah, we saw that people started feeling safer to ask for help. Leads and teams rallied around the common goal of shipping something great while first taking care of people. And so that gave us the compass for leadership during very incredibly hard times.
But of course, people-focused approach still has to ship a game. And people who are feeling good, that are less mentally taxed, are going to work a little bit easier. It's going to be better for them creatively. It's going to be better for them physically and mentally. But at the end of the day, we all are here for the project. So how did all of this actually help the product? Because I know there are some people in the room that are like, yeah, people, okay, but bottom line. And in fact, it actually did. It really, really did. Because we had compromise as the rule, not the exception. Saying no out of principle is bad. It just shuts people down. They won't want to work with you. And that's going to make everything feel like a fight. That every hill is one that you have to die on. When you set compromise as part of what your production process is, people will be less likely to work around you. And when they really fight for something, you know it's important to them. Real-world example is that there was a designer who was really infamous for having big ideas, not necessarily talking to the rest of the pipeline. And by the end of the project, this guy got it. He understood what the impact was, where everything was coming from, the cross-departmental chain reactions down the pipeline, the impacts that it was having. And very late into one of his missions, he said, Kayla, I want to make a change. And I went, okay, go on. Probably exactly like that, too. And he said, all right, hear me out. I want to add this new area. And I was like, cool, go on. well, I already talked to LD, level design, level art. I already have all the content I need, and I already talked to effects, and I already talked to audio, and they're all okay with it. And I went, it plays. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. I didn't have to say, well, did you talk to this person? Did you talk to that person? I didn't have to run it through multiple departments. This individual figured it out, talked to everybody, understood the pipelines that would be impacted by his changes, and that bit of the mission became a fan favorite after. If I had just said no out of principle because it was late in development and I was worried about the other departments getting hit, the world would have been robbed of that super fun moment, and he would have felt like crap. I would have felt like crap. Everybody would have been mad about it. Instead, we taught people how to talk to each other, how to talk across departments, and when he really wanted to fight for this thing that he wanted, that he believed would make the game better, and it objectively did, he went and had the conversations he needed to have, and it didn't become a hill to die on. It was just, this is important to me, and I figured out how to make it without hurting anyone, and we said, cool, go ahead. So never say no out of principle. You're just going to make it bad. And at the end of the day, truly, I believe that this was the best game that we could make. All games have constraints, all games have challenges, but the overall sentiment of the team, even in the retrospective, and I asked for the retrospective around RTM, which is the spiciest time to ask for it. All of the problems that people had, all of the big feelings, all of the challenges, we wanted those raw and visceral. The one thing that was consistent nearly across the board was that people were proud of the game that they made. And that was before any critical accolades, that was before anything came in. They were just proud, they thought it was fun, and there's no better feeling for me as a leader than seeing that through all of the challenges, people came out of this still liking each other and proud of the game that they made. And that all came from working within limitations, but also making sure that we understood one another.
All right, before we wrap up, what were some of the real-world challenges that required these new precedents or brought about these new habits? So in a minute, I'll give a time where the team of scope-minded creative direction and quality-minded production helped us through a really big challenge late in development. But Kayla can first highlight where we saw whole health advocacy really hit a stride.
So go home. The world is on fire. Most of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands was developed during the pandemic, and that meant a global crisis. It's something that in our generations, in 100 of years or so, we had not seen, and we were not necessarily prepared for as individuals. And that wasn't just the pandemic. There were wildfires across the world. We had a deep freeze in Texas that paralyzed us, and it was dangerous, and it killed people. And murder hornets. And like any other year, murder hornets would be the headline. No, they were there. All of this was deeply mentally taxing on the team. So we knew that our normal day-to-day dev problems, people were, instead of at this threshold, already here because their pipes were burst, the hornets were in their backyard, I don't know. And everyone was afraid of this novel virus that we didn't understand, we didn't have vaccinations for. And we had to figure out how to still make a game because we like having a job and eating and roofs over our heads. And we were fortunate to be able to do this from home. We are truly lucky. But it wasn't something that we just were prepared for. We didn't have a go home button yet. So a first response, the people first response, the empathetic response was to get everyone home, get them safe. People were primary. The game at that point was secondary. We needed people to have the room to be happy and healthy and okay as they could be. We were very fortunate that the leadership at Gearbox is supportive. We know that. We're privileged that when we said we need to go home, they said, okay. Or we need to give this person extended leave. They said, do what you think is right. And we were empowered as leads to be able to do that for our project and had a lot of trust there. Also, biz dev, finance, and IT, fantastic getting people set up. I think we were ready in under 2 weeks, but we still had that space for people's mental health. And we had to continue supporting the team for general messaging that it's okay to take time off. It's okay to be overwhelmed. Please let us know if the scope that your ability to do has changed. Asking if you can do something on time versus you can do something reasonably on time is a great thing to practice as a producer, because if you're a developer who loves your game, if you're a creative, those two are very different questions, and that's something I had to learn actively during this pandemic. If you don't make time for your team's wellness and your wellness, you will have to eat time for illness. And that is very true, and you'll have to remember that even in non-pandemic times, stress is just bad for your health.
The age-old question, is it fun yet? You can make all the greatest efforts to find the fun early, but game development, as we all know, is iterative. So deep into production, we learned our strengths, and we learned these tools and how to apply it. The relationship of scope-minded and creative direction and quality-minded production was in a great compromising set and back and forth between departments. But of course, we still faced design challenges and late, like you do. We got several layers of feedback. We have an amazing consumer research department internally, and we do a lot of internal testing. And so we get pages and pages of feedback. And the most critical part for us, and in almost any game, is the first hour of the game. The first hour of the game wasn't connecting like we wanted it to. So we quickly identified a lot of areas to improve, and we worked to get the most value for the lowest impact. And so I don't know if you've played Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, but we basically tweaked how the intro cinematic, the character creation, and then we created a whole new scene at the table live in-game with Tiny Tina explaining the rules, and then we dumped into the tutorial level, which was not the first version of the tutorial level, go figure. But it was that relationship, the handoff to all those four elements that clearly describes the game within a game, bunkers and badasses being played at the table in the real world and the game you're playing down below. That connective tissue wasn't working very early, and so we had to make a lot of changes, some fairly significant, very late, but we were more equipped on how to act and how to compromise, what to trade, what to not do, so that we could make the first hour of the game the best experience that it could be. And so the strike team meetings happened. We developed strike teams and reevaluated staffing and resources so that we could make the game as good as it could be very late.
I give Matt a lot of credit because this is a very hard conversation to bring to production. Hey, I know you've seen the feedback. I don't know if the game is fun yet. There's a really easy way to fix that, but it's going to be pretty impactful. That's not an easy conversation to have, and I've seen this go a lot of ways. I think we all have in this industry. Sometimes it's I'm not going to tell production and we're just going to work around it, or figure it out. And production says, but we don't have enough time or people. And they say, figure it out. Matt's question to me was, how can we do it? I am willing to remove some things, to scale back some things that are less important. We need this first 2 hours of the game to be critical. And because he came to me in that way, it was super easy to get the data we needed, to figure out what we needed to do. And I say easy in a relative term, but comparatively on a major pivot, fairly late in development of the project, we were able to rally the team, get the strikes teams together, and understand what we needed to do pretty quickly. So this is by far one of the most important examples of how something that we learned in unprecedented times became practical. This is a normal game development problem, but because we had been through the ringer in getting the team home and getting them healthy and keeping everyone safe, questions like this became a lot easier because we had already dealt with a lot harder big decisions. So this is when we say these things that we learned during these really hard times actually work for just day-to-day game development problems. As it turns out, games still have problems. It's still hard. There are still challenges. Matt and I are still working together, and every so often there is still friction. But we took with us that proactive communication, empathy, and our production and quality mindsets to make sure that we are still making good games together and using that same mentality we had during the hard times in the easier times. So just as a quick recap, those skills that we developed in Crisis do work on everyday problems. The empathy that we built with each other for each other's work and knowing that we were both trying to make a good game, spread to the team. The team empathy that we have continues to this day. We still actually work with a lot of the same people, so it's important not to make a lot of enemies at the end of the game. And that's just something that we learned and we really enjoy working together with. And there's still a better understanding of limitations across discipline. We still see, even with colleagues that we're no longer working with on the same project, more of those ideas coming up, more hands being raised to managing directors when they say, hey, I think there's a problem here, which is great to see. We've got that creative and scope mindset. Production is flexible for change. Design is flexible in changing their new plans to fit within the hard limitations of productions. Our powers combined, we can make magical things happen, and we can make a chaotic, great game, trademark, and we can still do it without putting too much pressure on the team. Compromising before fighting, that's the mindset. You can fight for the things that you want, you can fight for your ideas, but be willing to compromise, because the magic is probably somewhere in the middle of between what you want and what your colleagues want. And again, that whole health advocacy, this is not a song we just sing to say that we did. It's something that we both take very seriously and want to impart on our team. Person first response. Your people are required to make the project. You cannot make project without people. Even if it's just you, you need to take care of your only people. You do not pass the bus test. Please take care of yourselves and each other. That makes a better game, that makes a more creative game, and it makes a less toxic work environment for everyone around you. And also that requires trusting, open communication. Be there for your team. Follow through. If you do not follow through, you will lose that trust. They'll just assume you're saying things because you are just saying things. Be ready to act on whatever you promise. If you lose that trust, I cannot stress this enough, it will take you 10 times longer to get it back. Trust that your team understands what they're talking about. Trust your subject matter experts, and they'll trust you to guide them as a producer. Any closing thoughts?
No. You did wonderful. All right, we have a few minutes left for Q&A. Oh, thank you, thank you.
Empathy across different subject disciplines. Was that sufficient to changing the team's mind around more constraint-focused direction, or was there more to that process?
I think the constraint-focused direction is something that's more like innate in me, and it wasn't necessarily something Gearbox is not necessarily used to. It's just something that's innate in me. But as far as like a whole sea change, like it's more like you're driving a cruise ship and not a speedboat. So you can't expect like everybody to change and take a left turn. But I would say that fundamentally we did see change, and there was a great example of one of our designers start to think within constraint and what those constraints are, particularly with departmental impact. So it's like taking those moments and hoping that what you're saying has some sort of impact, and sometimes it just you have to look for those moments of getting it.
I would say people have to see it work too. You need some early adopters. If you don't follow through, if it just doesn't work, if it ends up being worse on the team than it was like not working in that way, you're going to lose everybody. If people start to see it working, even some of your toughest critics will become good adopters. And I definitely recommend appealing to your toughest critics. If you can get them to adopt, more people will follow.
So first, thank you very, very much for an extremely validating and nourishing talk on design and production leadership.
Thanks.
The content that you produced today, although it was largely about production and design leadership, was sort of a cultural manifesto. So I'm going to ask a question sort of tongue-in-cheek, and I want you to read between the lines a little bit. Whose job is it to create a cultural manifesto?
Leadership in the industry. Like I know it's tongue-in-cheek, but I believe this from the top down, and when I say that we are very fortunate at Gearbox to have that autonomy that we have, it's because we are supported by leadership. And that's really important. So they allow us to just do what we need to do, make sure that it's working well, and they don't ask too many questions. And we're almost out. But we will have the speaker lounge thing after this.
Are we done, or do we still have time for more? We have 0. Okay, so we will go to, what is the, we are going to head over to Overlook 2014, wherever that is. So if you want to talk more, oh, it's that way. I'm that way. Okay.
Our friendly GDC volunteers are pointing the way. We'll happy to take more questions.
Thank you so much for coming, guys.
If you have time to fill out the survey, please do.
Oh yeah, fill out the survey if you can.
Thanks, everybody.